Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to start talking about the actual process and theory of evolution and natural selection. And to really start off that conversation, we should take a step back and just recognize the gentleman who figured this out, who put all of this hard work and observation into a detailed idea that eventually, with lots and lots of additional support, has developed into what we know today as the theory of evolution. And that man is given the credit of being the father of evolution, and that's Charles Darwin. Keep in mind, he didn't actually invent evolution. Evolution is a natural process that has been occurring for as long as life has existed on Earth, but he was able to piece together observations and evidence over his lifetime that developed into the theory to explain how evolution actually works. What's the mechanism behind it? Really, he's the one who coined and described the idea of natural selection. So let's put Darwin's life back into the picture here. Charles Darwin's major contributions or major observations that are eventually going to allow him to develop the idea of evolution are really going to start with a major turning point in his life. And that's going to be he's 22 years old and he's kind of floundering in life. He doesn't know what to do with himself. Think of the age of 22 at this point in history to be like their mid-30s. And he's still living at home. He has yet to really succeed in any sort of career. He tried to go to seminary school to become a pastor, failed at it. He goes to medical school, spends his first opportunity in an operating room, can't handle it, fails out. And by this point, his dad is just frustrated. His dad is a relatively well-to-do man. They're upper middle class family in Great Britain at this point in time. So they've got some money, they've got some stability. But Darwin's dad basically is like, you need to get off your butt, you need to get a job and get out of my house. And so Darwin, at that point in his life, at 22, is sort of toying with this idea of being a naturalist, and Dad doesn't necessarily approve. And so he's kind of just pushing him to do something with himself. So Darwin ends up on the expedition of the HMS Beagle. And the HMS Beagle is a ship that is being commissioned by the British government to go map the coast of South America. So keep in mind that this is the height of British colonial period, right? They are going out, they are trying to find anywhere and everywhere that they can lay claim to. And so one of the places that is less well known to Europeans is South America. So the British government commissions this ship to go sail down the coast of South America, map it. They want to know what it looks like, what's there, and then eventually come back home. And this whole journey is going to ultimately take 5 years to complete. So again, let's put this into some historical context. So here's our Beagle. The captain of the ship is going to be somebody who's relatively well off, who's got some good education, who understands how to navigate and read charts and that sort of thing. But the vast majority of the crew on board would be relatively uneducated, definitely illiterate. They wouldn't be able to read. They're just the brawn of the workforce. They're just there to keep the things moving and take orders. So the captain, who knows he's going to spend years on this ship, wants some intelligent conversation. He wants to be able to converse with somebody who is of his own intellectual level. So he hires Darwin to be just that. He hires him to be his dinner companion, somebody to talk politics and religion and literature with, so that he's not bored the entire time that he's on this boat. So Darwin takes the job, and other than those obligations of meals and conversation, really is left to his own devices. So Darwin gets on this ship thinking this is going to be a wonderful adventure. I want to be a naturalist, so let's see what the rest of the natural world looks like. So he takes the job. What he doesn't realize is he's never really spent any major time on a major floating vessel, and so he does end up spending the vast majority of his time seasick, puking his guts out over the side of the ship. But when they do make landfall, he ends up seeing some really interesting things. They get down into Argentina, and he's going to observe organisms that look similar to the things he's used to seeing back in Great Britain, as well as things that he's never seen outside of a textbook before. Um, he's going to come across a giant sloth fossil on exhibition, on display, shortly after having just seen real sloths in nature. And he starts questioning, well, how did this giant sloth exist when clearly they look very similar to each other, but in a much smaller form now? What happened to these big guys? Um, they sail around the other opposite side of the coast, and they end up spending some time in Chile. He gets to climb the Andes Mountains for the first time, and he finds seashell fossils at the top of the mountains, hundreds and hundreds of feet above sea level. He experiences his first real earthquake in Chile at the same time. It's a pretty significant one, that actually causes the sea line to raise, the coastline, I should say, to raise a few inches, as a result of it. And so he starts piecing together the ideas of these seashells at the top of the mountain to the shift in sea level from the earthquake. He's also reading Charles Lyell's work at the time throughout this journey, so he's learning about all of these geologic processes that can happen. That becomes another big influence for him. He is most famous for stopping here along the way, and that is in the Galapagos Islands. And the Galapagos are a really interesting place because the organisms that exist there, a lot of them are endemic only to those islands. And that term endemic means sort of native. So things like these giant tortoises and marine iguanas and the finches, which is he's most closely associated with, are all very unique to the cluster of islands themselves. But even when you go from island to island, there are very distinct differences in those organisms as well. And so he ends up taking all sorts of samples and drawings and just tons and tons of data, back home with him. He doesn't realize what he has until he gets home many years later, but that's going to be a huge influence for him as well. And then there are other things. So he's going to do a lot of this Beagle voyage, and there's the fossils from the Andes, the earthquake he experiences, the Galapagos. He's going to get influences from Charles Lyell by reading his work. Lamarck is going to come in here. We'll talk a little bit about him later. He's going to be another influence for him. A gentleman named Mathis, who is really studying population size and how the interplay between competition and overpopulation plays into how well certain individuals within that population are able to survive and reproduce. We've got observations from selective breeding of organisms in farms. Darwin bred pigeons and so saw observations there. There are a lot of pieces that Darwin puts together over his lifetime, and some of it probably just a matter of luck that he ends up in the right places at the right time, with the right experiences to have been able to formulate the conclusions that he eventually draws from all of these experiences.